So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the campaign that we are actually participating in right now, being here today. But I wanted to back up because of something Ashton just said that was actually going to be my jumping off point, and that was the rally that I mentioned to you that kicked off our coalition back in April. We talked about all range of things, a lot of things that you've heard about today. My portion of the talk was about the government and our need to have a responsive government in this state. And one of the things, the word that he just used was choice. He just used that word of choice, and that was a key word in my talk because our coalition is the Better Path Coalition. We're choosing a better path. And so that idea of choice is fundamental to us and what we do. And one of the things that I cited was a quote by Ashton's mother, actually, and a similar quote that was given by Ellen Gerhardt and her daughter Elise. Ellen's here today. Now, both Melinda Clouderbuck and Ellen Gerhardt and Elise Gerhardt told reporters, basically, I'm paraphrasing now, that they fight or they resist because they have no choice. And our message is that we absolutely do have a choice. We are the government. We keep talking about it like it's something over there, but we are the government. And so we are the ones who have the power to make our elected officials, our regulators, and all of the people in Harrisburg, including Governor Wolf, accountable to us. And that's why we are putting together this coalition. Why don't you raise your hand or stand up if you're part of the planning team for today's coalition event. So look around. We have a number of people here today. It would be great to see all of you be part of our coalition. That's how we build power, and that's how we take our message even more strongly to the people who are sitting in those offices on the Capitol. So I just wanted to say that we firmly believed that that was ours to take hold of. I'm going to knock this thing over eventually. That was ours. Our power is the power of the government. Their power is to do what we tell them to do, and that's not what's happening. There's an imbalance of power. So it's up to us. And that's why we started the coalition. That's why we decided to have this campaign that we're part of right now, because we thought, well, my God, we have a constitutional amendment, a Bill of Rights level amendment protecting our right to a healthy environment. Why isn't it being enforced? And so we thought it was very, very important if we're going to talk about the kind of issues we want to talk about, that we have something focused on Article 1, Section 27. And so we decided last fall to start putting together a campaign that would happen today. Why? Because today is 1/27. But that's not the only reason why. We also picked the date not just to be clever or attempt to be clever, but we chose the date because we knew it was going to happen in the very same month that everybody, the governor and every legislator, was going to be swearing an oath to uphold the Constitution, not just the parts they like, but the entire Constitution. And so we thought it would be fresh in their minds if we came here this month to have some kind of an action and event to talk about all of this. And so we put together today's panel as the kickoff of something that's going to be occurring now over the next 2 days.
But I am honored to be here today, and I've been looking forward to it. And I realize so many of you here, all of you here, are interested in the amendment and where it is now and where it's going. So what I'd like to do today is take a few minutes to tell you how the amendment came to be. And the first thing I want to do before I do that is tell you that this picture here that you see of me in the jars of water was taken by my wife, Elizabeth. Beth, will you please stand up? And let me tell you the context of that picture. When I ran for the House of Representatives in 1966 in Northumberland County, it was a rough and tumble fight. It wasn't not a walk-in. I was running against the senior Republican in the House, and he had voted against bringing coal companies under the Clean Streams Law. And that was our issue. So she and I did all the brainstorming. She said, well, why don't we dramatize it with a picture? It was her idea. This is the picture, and it's the best picture that I've ever had to take it of me. And it's been used all over the place. So I think it's great. Now, I just wanted people to know that Beth was responsible for that, and I'm eternally grateful to Beth for a lot of reasons, but that's one of them. Well, in the picture, the jar of water on the left, the dark water, came from Coal Creek, which is a nickname for Shamokin Creek, that flows into the Susquehanna below Sunbury. It starts in Mount Carmel and goes eastward or westward through Northumberland County and drains all of the old coal mines. And we just took a jar of that water and right out. We didn't add anything to it. That's how bad it was. The rumor in those days, the story in those days was that if you fell into Coal Creek, you didn't have to worry about drowning. You would dissolve before you had the chance. So that's the picture. Well, let me tell you about how this amendment came to be, because it is a matter of history. And I want to share the historical context of it. Now, how many of you here have seen the movie Gone with the Wind? Raise your hands. Everybody has, okay. I started with Gone with the Wind. You may recall about 10 minutes into the movie, the Georgia gentlemen are sitting in Scarlett O'Hara's living room drinking their drinks and smoking cigars and saying how easy it will be to whip the Yankees if they invade. Then Clark Gable steps up and says, "Gentlemen, you're forgetting something. We in the South do not have a munitions factory, but in the North, in states like Pennsylvania, they have coal mines, railroads, and steel mills." And that's actually where this whole thing started. Pennsylvania and Ohio and other states became the economic engine to help the Union defeat the Confederacy because they had railroads, steel mills, and coal mines. They had that. And that started the brazen exploitation of our state's natural resources by these companies. And for 100 years, until 1965, and I'll get there in just a moment, that's what happened. These companies brazenly exploited our state. Now, I'm most interested in the coal industry because I'm the grandson of Polish immigrants who came here about 1905. And my grandfathers were anthracite miners near Shenandoah. And I'll never forget as a young man, a kid, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10 years old, going up there and seeing the conditions, seeing my grandfather come home from the mine so black and having my grandmother wash him in a tub to clean him up, and seeing the comb bank. They lived about 100 yards from a big comb bank, and the stream in front of them was like Coal Creek. Now, at that time, I didn't have any constitutional thoughts. I was just a grade schooler or junior high schooler. But it set in my mind, there's something really bad here. And you look at the history of the coal industry in northeastern Pennsylvania, think about it. Everybody's heard of the old state hospitals. There were 10 of them. There was one in Shamokin, there was one in Tamaqua, one in Shenandoah, Ashland, and so on. 10 state hospitals. You know what they were used for? To treat injured coal miners. Who do you think paid for it? Not the coal companies. The taxpayers paid for it. State hospitals. That's how brazenly the state was exploited by these companies, and the state government was part of it. They were an accomplice to it. The best illustration, of course, is in the Clean Streams Law. We've had about 5 Clean Streams laws since 1905. The first one was 1905 in response to a typhoid fever outbreak. So they passed a law. The coal companies were exempted. Another law was passed in 1919 to strengthen it. Coal companies were exempted. One passed in 1939. Coal companies were given very special treatment. And the same thing in 1945. So for all that time, whenever a Clean Streams Law was passed, the coal companies were exempted or given very special treatment. Now, my favorite example of how blatant the coal companies were is in a deed I found in Northumberland County. When I was searching titles after I got out of law school, I had to search a title in the borough of Coltmont. And I found this deed, here it is, from the Shamokin and Pottsville Railroad to Monroe Culp, the founder of Coltmont, for 95 acres. And right here in the bottom paragraph, and everybody wants to see it, you can read it. The coal company reserved unto themselves the right to discharge into the waters of Shamokin Creek forever, that's Coal Creek, where this black water came from, forever the refuse waste, and other material from their coal mine operations. That's how brazen, as a matter of legal right, they put it in the deed. Now that really stunned me. Well, anyhow, let's go forward now to 1965. House Bill 585 finally brought the coal companies under the Clean Streams Law. Finally, after all these years, and Governor Scranton signed the bill. Where I come into the picture, this is where I come into the picture, the incumbent representative from my district, a senior Republican in the House, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, voted no on that bill. And Bessie Beck, who was very active in the environmental movements in those days, said, Franklin, you run and I'll be your campaign chairman. And so I ran. That was the issue. This was the picture. And it was a real fight because Northumberland County Democrats didn't win. It was a heavy patronage organization. But I'm proud of the fact that we ran 5,000 or 4,000 votes ahead of Governor Shapp, Kennedy Shapp at that time. I beat the incumbent by 900 votes, and my picture was all over the state as the upset of the year. And they gave me the credit to the environmental. I was the first person elected really on an environmental issue. And that put me in the catbird seat, because when I got to Harrisburg, I was put on the Conservation Committee, which dealt with all this environmental legislation that was going to happen. When we took control of the House in 1968 to 72, we passed more environmental laws. In those 4 or 5 years, in the entire history of the state put together, we passed an overwhelming Clean Streams Law. We passed a mine safety bill. We had the surface mining cleanup bill. We had anthracite reform bills. We had all kind of a bill to create a Department of Environmental Protection, DEP. We had about 12 bills covered, air pollution bills. It was stunning. I was in the middle of that. I became secretary of the committee, and John Laudadio was chairman, and all these bills came through our committee. And I was excited because I could be in the middle. It's like being in a revolution, in the French Revolution, sitting on the judgment of all the past and passing these bills. Well, that's when the environmental amendment came into play. And as Karen said, in August of 1968, I got the idea while reading the New York Times. When I got elected re-elected, I introduced it as House Bill 958 in 1969, and I spent 3 years working on it. Now, I'm not going to go through the detailed legislative history of how it happened. I want to point out that John Dernbach is here. And John, will you stand? Where's John here? I don't see him. John, will you stand? Okay. John is... I like to say that I'm the expert on the bill before it became the law, but after the law became effective, he's the expert. Well, what he did, he and Widener Law School have online the complete legislative history of this amendment. And if you go online, you can find it gives you all the documents, it's all there. So I'm not going to go through a description of how we got there, of the whole legislative process. Suffice it to say that the idea was 3 broad principles. And I did this based on my experience and my training at Penn Law School. I took a good course in constitutional law. I took a course in trust law. So I had some idea what I was doing. And we wanted 3 broad principles, like the federal amendments to the Constitution. Not too specific, because otherwise it wouldn't go anywhere. The first was a basic right to a decent environment. I believe that the right to a decent environment is on the same plane as your right to go to church, the right to bear arms, or all these other rights are in the Article 1 of our state constitution. That was the first broad concept. The second was that the public natural resources, that is the air, the land, and the water, the river, and all that, that is the property of all the people. And the third broad principle was the state would be the trustee of these resources for future generations. This was a complete reversal. No longer would a state ever think of being an accomplice to these powerful industries. they had to be the trustee. So those were the three broad principles. The Widener Law School website will give you all the details in the legislative history. But I just want to conclude that on May 1971, after it passed both houses twice, went on the ballot for a public approval. And I want to read, I think I have the results here. I've never quite gotten over the stunning, talk about timing in politics. Here they are. There were 5 amendments on the ballot for public approval. 2 of them were defeated. But equal rights for women passed 784,000 to about 450,000. Our amendment, the Environmental Rights Amendment, passed 1,000,000 to 250,000. 4 to 1. And I keep kidding my wife, women's rights is only 2 to 1. I say that very carefully. I certainly support both. But anyhow, the timing was right. In love, war, and politics, timing is everything. And the thing that I felt good about was we had the right time to get this amendment on the ballot because the public was so upset by what had happened to it over the last 100 years. And everybody's saying, we no to that. We can't take it anymore. We're going forward under a new Bill of Rights, a new idea, and a new direction for how the state should deal with this environment. So that was a great night or the day after when all those results come in. Now then, went on to books, and you're going to hear from I'm not going to go into this in detail because I have other speakers here. But the courts kind of put the amendment in judicial repose. They didn't read it. They didn't believe the English language. I have to tell you just one quick story here. The late Justice Robert Woodside from Millersburg, a very distinguished jurist, who was on the Superior Court and Republican leader of the House, when this amendment was passed, and by the way, Woodside also wrote the book on the Pennsylvania Constitution. He and I had a conversation. He said, Franklin, I just don't think this kind of thing belongs in our Constitution. Now, it was just the old school. I couldn't get angry at him. It's just the way he felt. And I often say, I think that has to be a reason a lot of judges didn't want to deal with it. They didn't think, this was too radical for them, too new. But all that was changed thanks to Jordan Yeager and others in the Robinson Township case. I'll just share one more memory, because when my wife and I came home from Philadelphia that day, we didn't know anything about the case, weren't involved at all. Beth and I were in Philadelphia. We were down to the Wills Eye Hospital for an appointment. We get off the train in Middletown, and I go in the house about 3:30 or 4 o'clock, and the phone rings, and it's John Dernbach. He says, Franklin, have you seen the decision? I said, what decision? He sent it to me. It was Robinson Township. He sent me the complete text. Now, my wife's a lawyer, and I'm a lawyer. We spent that entire evening reading that decision, backwards and forward. We couldn't believe it. They cited my book. They cited my speeches in the House floor. But even more important, Justice Castile said, people interpreting this amendment have got to read the English language. Plain English. Now, I couldn't believe it. Nothing that ever happened to me politically or legally had the impact of that. So all things are moving forward since then, and you're going to hear a lot more from other speakers. And I'll be glad to answer all the questions you have about other things, aspects of that, because how many speakers we have. I'm going to at this point say thank you, and I'll be available. I'll have a few books to sign afterwards. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon. So I'm Maya Vemrasam, the Delaware Riverkeeper, and as Karen said, the author of the Green Amendment. And I really just want to take another moment to express the gratitude of all of you, of all of us, to you, Franklin Curry, for your incredible vision in the Environmental Rights Amendment. Thank you. We are truly going to change the world and are changing the world because of the work that you started back in 1971. And there are really no words to express our gratitude. So I just wanted to say that again because I know everybody in the room feels such an honor just to be in this space with you. So thank you. And I am really pleased and honored to be here with all of you to talk about the incredible opportunity that Pennsylvania's Green Amendment provides for us to better protect our environment for present and future generations, but to also talk about the tremendous obligation that we all have to ensure that we take full advantage of Pennsylvania's Green Amendment for protecting our environment, both for ourselves, but also for the rest of the world that is very literally watching us. Now, people do have the question, very quickly, they have the question, gosh, how long has Pennsylvania had a Green Amendment? Is it 48 years? Because I hear that it was passed in 1971. Or is it 5 years? Because I've only really been hearing about this Green Amendment in the last 5 years. And the answer the truth is that the answer is both. Right? As Franklin Curry said, while the Pennsylvania Green Amendment was put onto the books, put into the Constitution in 1971, very quickly after it was placed into the Constitution, the courts stripped from our Pennsylvania Green Amendment its legal strength. They declared it to be good public policy, but not to have the same legal force and effect of all the other provisions in the Bill of Rights section of our Pennsylvania state constitution. And that really was the way things stood for 42 years. For 42 years, we had this amazing language on the books. But in reality, when it came to our environmental rights and environmental protection, nothing had really changed. But then, of course, enter drilling and fracking. Right? An industry that was overwhelming Pennsylvania communities and devastating our environment. And the passage of what many of us refer to as a gift basket to the fracking industry, known as a piece of legislation known as Act 13. Act 13 was passed by the legislature in 2012 and signed into law by Governor Corbett that same year. And Act 13 did so many bad things, right? It gave the power of eminent domain to the fracking industry in some circumstances. It relieved them of the responsibility to notify folks who may have had their drinking water impacted by fracking activities, relieved them of the opportunity to make, or of the obligation to notify everybody of the potential threat. It very literally gave them the right, by virtue of state law, to drill and frack in every part of every community where the Marcellus Shale and other shales lied, right? They were given the right to drill and frack in our agricultural areas, our historic and environmental preservation areas, even in the heart of our residential communities. So it really was a tremendous gift to the fracking industry. And as bad as things were already in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where drilling and fracking was happening, it was really about to become a whole lot worse if Act 13 was allowed to be implemented. But there were a group of us, in my role as the Delaware Riverkeeper, along with the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, 7 towns and a physician decided that we had to challenge Act 13. And the argument that the Delaware Riverkeeper Network brought to this collaborative, an argument that was crafted and delivered by an unparalleled legal mind, Jordan Yeager, who you're going to hear from later, an argument that was informed by a tremendous scholar, John Dernbach, who Franklin Curry has already referenced, right, was crafted and put forth in order to challenge Act 13. The case did go all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and in December of 2013, we got an amazing victory out of the Supreme Court, a victory where the plurality opinion was actually crafted by a very conservative Supreme Court Chief Justice Castile. And I just want to share with you some of the things that Chief Justice Castile said in the decision that he rendered in response to Act 13 and our legal challenge. By any responsible account, the exploitation of the Marcellus Shale formation, drilling and fracking, will produce a detrimental effect on the environment people, their children, and future generations. That the natural resources that were being harmed were resources that were essential to life, to health, and to liberty. And that as a result, Act 13, the provisions that we were challenging, violated the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. And in that moment, with that decision, we not only defeated some of the most devastating aspects of Act 13, but we very literally returned to the people of Pennsylvania their constitutional right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And so, as you can see, while we've had Article 1, Section 27 on the books for all these 48 years, it's been in the last 5 years, when Article 1, Section 27, Pennsylvania's Green Amendment, has had the legal strength and vigor that Franklin Curry and the people of Pennsylvania in 1971 originally intended it to have. Now, it's a good thing that we have a strong Green Amendment here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, because here in Pennsylvania, like in states across our nation, while we have a tremendous wealth of environmental protection laws, statutes, and regulations, and ordinances, the fact of the matter is this system of laws is failing us. All we have to do is read the news headlines in Pennsylvania and beyond, and we can see all the ways that people and communities are suffering because of pollution and degradation. We can see that this current system of laws has been failing us and that we need something better, something stronger to protect our environment for present and future generations. Because of the failing of these laws, we have communities in Pennsylvania and across the nation that have been seeking solutions to secure the greater protection for the environment that we all need. And Pennsylvania's Green Amendment is a powerful, powerful part of the solution. And we are so lucky that we here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania have this strong legal hammer right now that we can use to vindicate our inalienable rights to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. Because the fact of the matter is, there are only 2 states that have a Green Amendment of this kind. Pennsylvania, and that's because of the passage of our Green Amendment, but also its reinvigoration in December of 2013, and Montana. That's it. There are a whole bunch of other states that talk about the environment in their constitutions in a variety of ways, some of them with very beautiful language. But when you look at the language carefully, when you look at the placement, when you look at the terminology, what you see is that there are only 2 states that recognize the right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment as an inalienable right in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, on par, that deserves legal protection, that is on par with those other human rights, civil rights, political rights, fundamental rights that we hold dear. Yeah. And so people are asking the question. They're looking at what's happening here in Pennsylvania, right? And they're asking the question, does constitutional recognition of environmental rights really make a difference? Does it really make a difference? Many of them say, after all, you still have fracking in Pennsylvania. Well, I'm here to tell you, and Jordan Yeager is going to put the exclamation point on what I'm about to tell you, is that the answer to the question is yes, yes. Having a Green Amendment, having Bill of Rights, inalienable rights recognition of our right to a healthy environment is making a difference here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The thing is, we're very early on in the process. It's just been 5 years since our Green Amendment has been given its legal vigor and its legal life. So we are only now in the beginning stages of doing the work of defining what it actually means to have a constitutional right to a healthy environment, and then defending that right through our advocacy, through our litigation, through all the good works of so many people in this room and beyond. We are having an impact on fracking and other threats to our communities, to our environment, to our water, to our air, to our soils, to our landscapes. We are achieving important protections for present and future generations. We are on the path to restore important strength and power to the environmental justice movement through the implementation of our Green Amendment. We are bringing science and facts and consideration of real-world impacts back to the decision-making process because of our Green Amendment. We are holding our government officials accountable for honoring their constitutional duty to protect our constitutional right to a healthy environment. We have communities and families that are rising up and embracing their constitutional right to a healthy environment. We are bringing this message to everyone, far and near, including into the classrooms, to children who didn't learn about their constitutional right to a healthy environment because they didn't really have one until a few short years ago here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and didn't have one in states beyond. And because of the work we're doing here in Pennsylvania, because of the successes we are starting to have, we are inspiring a Green Amendment movement that is sweeping the nation. And we have Green Amendments that have already been proposed by legislators in New York and in the state of New Jersey. And I'm working with other communities in other states across the nation where there's a tremendous commitment to securing their own Green Amendments in other states across the nation. We all here in this room know every family, every community, every state deserves the inalienable right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. But it is not enough to just know that we have an inalienable right to these things. We have to secure the highest level of protection you can get under the law here in the United States of America for these inalienable rights. And that is the passage of a Green Amendment that recognizes and protects these rights in the Bill of Rights section of our state constitutions, of every single state constitution across our nation, and eventually in our federal constitution. But it's all starting here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Montana has had one for a long time, too. They had some good early victories, but that movement seems to have lost its vibrance. So the action right now is here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And the nation right now is watching what's happening here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so it is our opportunity to embrace and get best value for environmental protection out of our Green Amendment, but it is also our obligation to succeed in getting the full protection we can out of our Green Amendment so that we can show every other community in every other state across the United States of America that having a Green Amendment truly matters and that we all deserve one in our states and ultimately in our federal constitutions. Thank you so much for being here.
All right. So we had this kind of dark period from 1971 until about 5 years ago, December 5 years ago, and we had an era where the Environmental Rights Amendment was in the Constitution. We could look at it, we could say that's a nice thing, it's a nice statement, but it had never been given meaning in the courts. And Professor Dernbach had written a set of articles that I don't read a lot of law review articles, but I had read these, and it said taking our environmental rights seriously. And so this question was, we've got them out there. We've got this set of rights out there in the Constitution. We've got courts that are, and a society that holds its Constitution at the highest level, and that says that we're, even among conservative jurists, that we're supposed to interpret the actual text of the Constitution. And so you've got this statement that says people have a right to clean air, pure water, and the preservation of the values of the environment. You've got a statement that says that Pennsylvania's public natural resources are the common property of all people, and that the Commonwealth, as a trustee, has a duty to conserve and maintain them for the benefit of future generations. And yet you never have a court decision that does anything with that. And some of that is a lesson about justice generally, okay? Justice is a constant struggle. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. These rights, having them there, is not enough. It takes advocacy. It takes people being engaged and expecting more of their elected officials, expecting more of the people who are administering our regulations and issuing permits, and expecting more of the courts to really preserve the values that our Constitution speaks to. And so we can see now some examples in the last 5 years of where the courts have started to do that. And it has only, though, been because of an engaged citizenry that has demanded that the courts do that. And we've seen now examples of our administrative agencies taking the right seriously. And it's only, again, because of engaged citizens demanding that they do that. And so Maya already talked about what Act 13 did. The biggest thing that it did was it said to every municipality in every corner of the Commonwealth that they had to change their zoning laws. And zoning is really how local governments protect the environment. It's where they say we're going to allow industrial activity, but we're going to allow it here where it can't do as much harm, where it won't interfere with the peace and quiet enjoyment of the residents who are living over here, where it won't interfere with the aquifers and the groundwater that is precious that we all depend on for our drinking water in having it over here. And so you separate out those incompatible land uses through zoning. And what Act 13 did was told every municipality that they had to now allow industrial fracking and associated land uses next to their schools, next to their nursing homes and hospitals, next to their residences, in areas that they were trying to protect because of the natural resources that were of value to the community. So it was a massive, massive overreach. We saw in Act 13 a law that said that doctors couldn't share confidential information that they got from fracking companies with their patients. A law that gave eminent domain authority for gas storage to gas companies. And let's think about eminent domain. We think about left and right politically. When you're talking about turning over the power of government to a private corporation to take private land, private property owners' land, to allow it to be used to store fossil fuels, that's something that speaks to everybody, right? And part of what we've recognized in the Environmental Rights Amendment is that neighbors have rights too, right? And property rights are a properly exalted value in our system. But neighbors have property rights too. And part of that family of property rights that neighbors have is the ability to breathe clean air and the ability to drink clean water. And you can't, on your property, do something that's going to damage my right on my property to be able to live, to be able to drink the water and breathe the air. And that's what this constitutional amendment protects. And so when the court struck down Act 13 in what we call the Robinson Township Delaware Riverkeeper Network case, what it did was it recognized those values. It recognized that when you've got a law that has that kind of overreach, it's taking away those rights from residents. The next case was, and that was what we call a plurality decision. So it was a majority of the court said the law is unconstitutional, but there were only there were only 3 that signed on to Justice Castile's decision. And so there was a question mark around that decision about its precedential value. How much would future courts be bound by it? And so a year and a half ago, in a case called PEDF, now a full court adopted the analysis in the Act 13 decision. And in doing that, it said that when the legislature takes away funds that are there as part of this trust, as part of the body that we all have a right to have preserved and maintained, when the legislature does that by taking funds for natural gas drilling and takes them out of those natural resources and puts them into the general fund, you've got a violation of the trust responsibilities. So it gets into the money piece of this, right? But if we're going to take resources that we're going to earn, in effect, off of these natural resources, we have to put them back into the natural resources. That's part of maintaining those trust principles. And so the PEDF decision was an advance because it held the legislature accountable for that, but also because it reinforced the basic principles of law that had been discussed in the Act 13 decision. And so I just want to walk through what some of those basic principles are, because that's really what informs everything that moves us forward. The first is that these environmental rights are on par with our other political rights. So that means just as the government can't take action that would infringe on our free speech rights, just like the government can't take action that would infringe on our right to bear arms, likewise the government can't take action that would infringe on those environmental rights. So it's at the highest, most sacred level in our Constitution. It means that when those principles have been violated, that the people have the ability to challenge them. The people have the ability to hold government accountable. That this clause serves as a limitation on what government can do. Okay? So all branches of government, whether it's in the legislature or whether it's in the regulations or in a permitting decision, all those decisions are limited by what would impact our rights. That the natural resources are held in trust and that they are there for the benefit not just of us now, but for future generations. That it is a responsibility, that these responsibilities flow to all levels of government. So it's not just a responsibility at the state level, but it's also a responsibility at the municipal level. And that responsibility is to prohibit the degradation, diminution, and depletion of those natural resources. And this is probably the part of the decision that has yet to really be tested, which is that the government has a duty to act affirmatively to prevent harm and to protect those resources. So not just a limitation, but an actual affirmative duty to act. I don't have much time, so I want to get into just a couple of the decisions that have come out since these sets of decisions, just to tell you ways in which they're coming up, okay? So one of the ways these issues are coming up is in the context of local regulations and whether what the state does in preempting local regulations can withstand scrutiny. So if the state takes away all ability of the local government to consider environmental impacts, that kind of state legislation is going to be suspect under the Environmental Rights Amendment. We see it in the context of another case that the Riverkeeper Network is involved in with a long contaminated site, the Bishop Tube site, where the Department of Environmental Protection has recognized for over a decade that immediate action is needed to clean up this site, and yet has taken no action and not required any action to be taken. And so this is the first decision where the courts have recognized that DEP can be ordered to act when it has failed to act and there's an immediate need to act to protect those values that are protected under Article 1, Section 27. The Environmental Hearing Board is the state court that hears appeals from DEP permitting decisions. And so there's been a lot of the cases that have been playing out there. What a lot of these speak to is a concept that is challenging for the regulated community, challenging for the industries that want to be able to do what they want to do. Because they're used to looking at the statutes and regs and say, if we comply with the statutes and the regulations, that's enough. And what the Environmental Hearing Board has made clear in the cases in the last 5 years is that's not necessarily enough, that the Constitution is above our statutes and regs, and that if what you permit DEP is going to pass muster, if we're going to allow it to happen, it's not enough to comply with statutes and regs. You also have to comply with this constitutional provision. And so we've seen that come up over and over again in cases. We've seen a case involving an effort to apply sewage sludge on farm fields next to a residential community. And the board said, no, simply complying with the regulatory standards isn't enough. And if it violates the Constitution, you can't go forward. And that permit ended up being withdrawn. We've seen it in the context of a CAFO, an industrial hog operation. And you see the name Hudson, Marjorie Hudson, who's the lead challenger in that case, is here today, challenging a huge industrial hog facility in south central PA. And what the Environmental Hearing Board said was the department had approved an experiment. They didn't know what would happen if this went forward, what would happen to the natural resources. And the board said, under the Environmental Rights Amendment, as a trustee, you have to assess what the impact is going to be of your actions. You can't just go play Russian roulette with our environmental rights. And if you haven't, we're going to say that permit needs to be put on hold. And that's what's happened in this case. So I don't have time to go through others, but these are the basic concepts that are starting to play themselves out. They will only continue to play themselves out with an engaged and informed citizenry. So thank you all for being here today.
The second talk I ever gave 10 years ago on the general topic of what you call fracking, what I call shale gas shit. in a church, don't tell my wife, was in a church. It was in a church basement in Wyalusing, Pennsylvania. Anybody been there? I didn't intend to tell this story, but I'm in it now, so you're going to get it. So I showed up in Wyalusing right before dark, and literally across the street from the church was a railroad siding. And they were offloading proppant sand at that railroad siding. You all know what proppant sand is, right? And I drove down the road to the church, looked to the right, and it looked like it was snowing. In fact, the entire fields around that spot were all white, and it was spring, late spring. It couldn't have been snow. And it was dust. And literally across the street from the church was a children's playground. And it was covered. So it doesn't matter where I go over the last 10 years, church basements, meeting halls, high school auditoria, libraries, there's always something across the street. Here it's the river. And you know what that river is flowing down with. I grew up on the Delaware, Maya. The Delaware doesn't have that junk flowing down. This one does. So I'm sorry, I'm off on a tangent already. But anyway, the Green Amendment, my opinion is it gives us, you, the right to say no more. And I want to expand on that idea of no more. Let's see. It gives us the right to say no more to unclean air, impure water, and an unnatural environment. It gives us the right to say no more because, as you know, there is a better path forward. So I want to briefly expand on each of these problems that the amendment is supposed to ameliorate or forbid. No more unclean air from shale gas development. And I realize many of you in the back aren't going to be able to see the details and what's on this screen, so hopefully the graphic will give the effect. It's a map of Pennsylvania. Every one of those dots is a industry self-reported location that emits at least 1 ton of VOCs per year. Is that a complete map of VOC emissions in the state of Pennsylvania from oil and gas operations? No. What's missing? Every well pad. How many are there? Okay. What's missing is the expected 50,000 additional shale gas wells, meaning another roughly 10,000 shale gas pads, roughly another 50 compressor stations, if we don't say no more. I didn't say stop now, shut down everything. I said no more. There are 82,000 operating oil and gas wells in the state of Pennsylvania. Shut them down gradually, but no new ones. No more. And I'll expand on why that's necessary in about 3 minutes. No more unclean air from shale gas development. You heard that. No more impure water from shale gas development. Whoop, I'm getting there sooner or later. I've realized, again, you in the back can't see what's going on here. This is a graph. Across the bottom of the graph is time, starting from 2014 up to 2018. The green line is the number of unconventional wells drilled in your state, your commonwealth every year. The red line is the number of official formal complaints issued by private landowners, church owners, business owners to the state, to the Commonwealth DEP each year. And the blue is the number of complaints, formal complaints to the DEP about water contamination. I know you can't read the vertical axis, so I'll tell you that as of this morning, there were 327 confirmed water contamination incidents from unconventional shale gas development in the last 5 years. I'm sorry, the last 10 years. 327 confirmed out of 4,100 complaints. Most of those complaints have not been processed yet. So that 327 is an underestimate. That's 327 families or businesses or schools or churches that no longer have access to pure water in violation of the Green Amendment. No more. Oop. No more destruction of the natural environment from climate change. Now, the interpretation of the natural environment is open to debate. The Earth spins on its axis. It's a natural act. It tilts on its axis. That's a natural act. It revolves around the sun. That's a natural act. And each of those processes which are natural have natural oscillations. Climate change is not a natural act when it's anthropogenic, which is a big word meaning you and I do it. Again, a graph. Horizontal axis is year, starting from 1984 up to 2018. Vertical axis is the concentration of methane in the atmosphere. In this room right now, there should be 1.9 parts per million methane. That's natural. Anything above that is unnatural. That vertical red line occurs somewhere around 2005, 2006. Anybody notice anything? What happens after 2005, 2006? Don't tell me the concentration of methane in the atmosphere goes up. Tell me that there was a shale gas revolution and a shale oil revolution. And recent science has now proven, without a doubt, that that drastic increase in methane concentration in the atmosphere is concurrent with increased oil and gas development, mostly from shale formations. That's an unnatural act. No more. What else happened in roughly 2005, 2006 that caused that spike? Is that a coincidence? I show you two. Engineers love to show graphs, right? So here's a graph that has a kink in it, and here's a graph that has a kink in it. Cause and effect. Cause and effect. Not coincidence. Causality. And finally, another graph, and I'll have to explain it to you. It's going to have two parts to it. 1900, anybody around? 2070, anybody around? Thank you. Impact of climate change, global warming, degrees centigrade. Squiggly black line, data. Measurements, what we know has happened up to 2010. Red dots, everything that's happened since 2010. Solid lines, computer predictions. There are those people, none in this audience, who say, you can't believe climate models. You can't even predict the weather tomorrow. How are you going to predict climate 20 years from now? Does that sound like a president? Each one of those solid lines is the result of a computer model prediction of where we will be in our climate future. Each one of those solid lines takes into account a different set of assumptions. The most important two are that line, the purple one, that's business as usual. Paris never happened. No country agreed to drastically decrease its development of fossil fuels. No country said no more. The computer models predict that solid purple line. Where do those red dots fall? On top of the purple line. You can't make an engineer happier, and I is one. You can't make an engineer happier than to tell an engineer, your model predicted the future accurately. That's called validation of the mathematics and the physics. The second most important curve is the aqua curve. The aqua curve is the only one on that predictive suite that says if we had in the past drastically reduced our demand for and consumption of fossil fuel starting in 2009, that's the path we'd be on. And you'd see that we would never get to 2 degrees centigrade and that there'd be a reasonable chance that we wouldn't even get to 1.5. But those models were made in 2009. We just lost 10 years. We lost 10 years because we didn't say no more 10 years ago. If we don't say no more now, that purple curve is our fate. Our kids' fate, our grandkids' fate. No more. So the Green Amendment is our right to say no more. It's your right, it's our right, it's the right, as Maya pointed out, of every citizen in this country, and eventually every citizen on Earth, because we can no longer allow increased production, burning, and emission of fossil fuels. What the world needs, what the country needs, what the state needs, what we each individually need is to figure out ways, reasonable, rational, planned, managed ways to decrease our demand for and our use of fossil fuels and increase our demand of and production of renewable energy. That's the path forward. Thank you.
So my name is Ashton Clatterbuck, and I'm 17 years old. I'm a senior in high school. And just about 5 years ago, I began work with Lancaster Against Pipelines. And this was sort of like my introduction to the whole climate, whatever. I had a knock on my door, and there was a pipeline proposed through my backyard. Over my journey through those 5 years, I started getting involved with March for Our Lives, and most recently, about a year ago, I began working with the Sunrise Movement, which was referenced a little bit earlier. So through all of these different movements that I've been a part of, a lot of the problems surrounding each issue I found were relatively similar. It isn't necessarily that we need new laws as much as we have to reinforce the ones that are already in place. After the 5-year battle against the Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline, our community in Lancaster was forced to sort of come face to face with the injustices that exist within our current system. From courts to state politicians to corporate exemptions, all of these, and even like finance laws was a big one I found. Every step of the way was designed to like rape the land at as cheap a price as possible. Did you know that the gas industry is actually largely exempt from the federal Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and Clean Drinking Water Act, which are some of the most important laws to protect our environment, and yet these extremely destructive types of infrastructure are not required to abide by these laws. Allow me to give an example from my anti-pipeline work. Lancaster County, where I'm from, is ranked 8th worst in the nation for air particle pollution. The DEP determined that the Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline and the construction involved with it would exceed the allowable limit of air pollution in our county. So it seems like the obvious solution would be to say, go home, we do not permit you to construct this pipeline, it is illegal to do so. Instead, the DEP actually approached Williams with a plan. They said, hey, I'm obviously not quoting this exactly, but yeah, they're on a first plan basis. They went up and they approached Williams and said, we see you have this facility in Maryland that is actually below the required limit, or you're below the restrictive limit. And so if you want, how about you just pay a fee and you can pollute Lancaster County up to the extent that you don't pollute Maryland, which did absolutely nothing for the air that I breathe every single day. It was just insane. And the most concerning part of this, or most bizarre at least to me, was not only did they allow this to happen, they actually encouraged it. They recommended it to the company. They could have very easily, it was within their power to just send Williams packing, and instead they found a way to allow them to pollute my air further. And this was even higher than deemed safe or reasonable by our government. And our government does not have extremely high standards to begin with. And we actually held an action at the hearing, DEP hearing, Lancaster Against Pipelines had this action where the entire audience during the hearing, while they're announcing that they're going to allow them to buy these air credits from Maryland, and the entire room just got up and left, which was our statement. That was one of my favorites. So that was just one example of how we've seen our government actually encouraging corporations to violate our rights. Article 1, Section 27 is very clear in its wording that we have the right to clean air, pure water, and the preservation of natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of the environment. Not only does this grant us the right to grant us these fundamental rights, but it also, at the end, says that the government will ensure it and enforce it, saying, quote, "The Commonwealth shall conserve and maintain them for the benefit of all people." That is a level of responsibility, and our politicians have woefully failed to fulfill this duty. My state senator, Scott Martin, is a perfect illustration. No, that's there it is. Our state senator, Scott Martin, well, mine, is a perfect illustration of this failure to the people. As the people in Pennsylvania realized that they would need to take things into their own hands, many groups have resorted to using direct action. Lancaster Against Pipelines was included in one of these groups. If politicians were not going to do their job, it was up to us to do it for them. Following our largest action, in which 23 people, including myself, were arrested, Senator Scott Martin proposed a bill that, thank you, that would make environmental activists responsible for paying the costs that are, or paying the expenses of first responders. So like police officers or medics that come to the scene of an action, that those participants of the action would be responsible for paying for all of their expenses. And following, within just weeks of this bill, Scott Martin co-sponsored yet another bill that targeted the community members who are opposed to the Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline. This new bill would make protesting critical infrastructure a felony, and pipelines are included in critical infrastructure. This meant that protests like this, where we sing in front of a bulldozer, if we're on the property of the construction site, we could face up to 2 years in prison. My charges were dropped, so I'm okay. However, my mom was also one arrested then, and she is currently still in the process of, the charges are still up. She has yet to have a court date. So when the people who were arrested here, 7 of them said, all right, we're going to take this to court. We plead not guilty, and they used those rights in Article 1, Section 27 to say, we have the right to clean air and clean water, so it was necessary for us to do this to stop the project, so that our rights are defended. Lower courts threw that out, saying that's an invalid case. You can't use that, basically saying that that violation of your rights is not a valid reason to do this. And so it was completely dismissed, and they would have to appeal or use a completely different case, which no other case is valid, because that was the reason that they were there. Sorry. So most currently, I've been working, spearheading the Lancaster High School campaign with the Sunrise Movement. This movement is very different. We're targeting lots of legislators in this one. It's less actions and more targeting different legislators. This is in DC. In the beginning of December, there was a group of 1,100, mostly high school and college students who are involved with Sunrise. We went to DC, and there were several targeted offices. Like from wherever you're from, that is the office that you went to, and we are trying to pass a Green New Deal. And so we had papers with us, and we went into our legislators' offices, and we said, like, please sign this. We have the right to clean air and clean water, and we want you to pass a bill that would acknowledge that. And so right now in Lancaster County, I'm spearheading all the high schoolers to work locally, on the local level, to go to our city council, to our county commissioners, and say, like, we need a base local resolution that will address the issues of, like, carbon emissions, promote green jobs and things like that where we are. So all over the county, and actually all over the country, we have cities that are being targeted by these different high school groups. So after we learn all this, and we know that some of the biggest climate scientists have said we only have 12 years to dramatically and bring remedial change to our current system before effects are catastrophic and irreversible. In 12 years, I'll be 29. I will not have seen my 30th birthday. And yet, the effects of climate change will be irreversible unless we do something right now. So what do we do with this information? Well, for one, we don't give in. We do not back down. We need to take a stand and not stand down. We must vote out the old. We need to vote out the old, Mr. Martin there. And we need to bring in new people, but also make sure we keep the pressure on them as well and hold them accountable. It's embarrassing that the people who are in a position of power and to bring positive change waste their time oppressing those of us who are trying to do just that and honestly doing their jobs because they're not doing it themselves. I call every single one of you here today as well to take action and join this movement, or join a movement that maybe is near you, or even donate, or whatever means that you have, or whatever you are capable of, do it, because we don't have much time. Youth are going to be the ones who have to take this, and we don't really have a choice at this point. Like I said, I'll be 29 when the effects are irreversible, So I can't wait and grow up to make change, because by that time there will be nothing worth changing. And so I call all of you to do your best for the youth of this country. And also, let's hold our senators and other people accountable who are in office, because they're the ones who need to bring the change, because I cannot pass a law, but I can present one and try to bring change that way. Thank you all.
Hi, my name is Laura, and I'm from an organization called Lancaster Against Pipelines. Thank you to the people who invited me to speak, and thank you all for being here. Today we are here to take action against pollution in our air, water, land, and environment, and to help protect our health, the health of the people who will live here after us, and the health of the animals we share this land with. I'm 9 years old and have been a part of Lancaster Against Pipelines since I was very little. In the beginning, I went because my parents made me. Then, one night last year, on our drive home from soccer practice, I saw a family of deer near a stream. The stream was near a pipeline crossing. I got worried for the deer because I know pipelines can leak and explode. The deer were in danger just by being near the pipeline. I wanted the deer to be safe, and I wanted my friends who lived near the pipeline to be safe also. That's when I decided I wanted to be part of the solution. After that, going to Lancaster Against Pipelines Action was something I wanted to do, not just something my parents dragged me to. I'm here today not just because I wanted to get out of school, because I think we all deserve clean air, safe water, and a healthy environment. It's in our state constitution that we deserve these protections, and I want our lawmakers to do a better job of keeping us and the animals safe. Thank you, and have a great day.
Hello, my name is Vim Van Rossum. I don't think that the kids and adults of this state want to have to wear gas masks, eat contaminated food, grow in poisoned soil, and drink poisoned water because the people of today wouldn't do anything to help. But our elected representatives can help change that by not ignoring the Green Amendment that states that the people of this state have the right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And you, our Pennsylvania representatives and senators, do not have the right to take that away from people and animals by approving pipelines, fracking, gas drilling, decimation of forests, and many more destructive projects. You cannot take away the rights of people and animals by destroying our environment and their lives, and not giving us a clean, livable future. The Lorax did not have a Green Amendment to help him speak for the trees and animals, but I do. I am going to use it to protect animals and the environment, and in doing so, I am protecting the people too.
My name is Serena Herzog. I'm 18 years old, and I've lived in Chester County my whole life. When I was your age, I spent as much time as possible running through fields and forests and swimming in ponds and creeks, and I still love to be outside all the time. I always feel a sense of calmness and safety when I'm in nature, but it's terrifying to know that these places are not immune to climate change. Over the summer, in my community, we received 36 inches of rain. That's 3 feet of rain in a period of 4 months. Pennsylvania usually receives about 46 inches a year, so you can see there's a real difference there. As a result of all the rain, roads flooded, footbridges and fences were washed out, houses flooded and grew mold, pesticides and harmful chemicals were washed into our waterways, and farmers' crops were ruined and could not be harvested. Weather like this is becoming the norm. Heavy rain, prolonged drought, powerful hurricanes and cyclones, we all know the story. But we know our world doesn't have to be like this. I don't want my family and friends to live in fear of the devastation caused by an intense hurricane or wildfire, and I know that no one else does. The good news is that we already have the ideas and the solutions. We just need to garner the willpower to implement them. Last summer, I discovered the Sunrise Movement, a group of young people working to stop the climate crisis and create millions of clean, green jobs in the process. We work to elect candidates across the country that pledge to be climate champions and not to take money from the fossil fuel industry. We canvassed, phone banked, and held rallies for months, and it worked. 2/3 of the people we endorsed were elected, and 2 of them work in this building now. After the election, we began holding actions in DC and across the country. In November, 200 of us held a sit-in at Speaker Nancy Pelosi's DC office. We demanded that addressing the climate crisis be at the top of the agenda. It was so exciting when Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez joined us and delivered a resolution for a Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is the first and only proposed federal legislation that addresses the climate crisis at the scale required by science. The resolution mandates bold action, like transitioning to 100% renewable energy and zero net emissions. A month later, we returned to DC, this time 1,000 strong. We lobbied and held sit-ins, and ultimately, 45 representatives, over 300 organizations, and several 2020 presidential hopefuls voiced their support for the Green New Deal. We changed the conversation around the climate crisis, and the Green New Deal was covered nationally. It was so powerful to realize how much of an impact youth had made. But even with victories like these, it can feel so frustrating when our concerns are not recognized and the fate of our futures is ignored. Protecting the environment is not easy work. We're up against corporations with lots of money and politicians that refuse to acknowledge the urgency of the crisis we face. But with only 12 years to radically transform all aspects of our society, if we have any hope of preserving life as we know it, we don't have any choice but to keep being activists. We Pennsylvanians cannot allow the inaction of our government to deter us, nor can we let the suffocating feeling of the massive challenges we face get us down. We are here to fight for climate justice because we share a love for the places we call home and for one another. We demand that our elected officials join us in this fight for our future, and we demand that they begin today. There's a lot of work to do, that's for sure. But a good place to start is by upholding Pennsylvania's Green Amendment. Governor Wolf, state representatives and senators, we're calling on you. Will you fulfill your constitutional duty and uphold our inalienable rights detailed in Article 1, Section 27 of Pennsylvania's Constitution? We all want a future to grow up in. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annika Van Rossum, and as Tim said, I'm a politics major, environmental studies minor at Ithaca College, and I've been a lifelong advocate with Delaware Riverkeeper Network my entire life. So I'm 22 years old. I've spent my entire life living in the amazing state of Pennsylvania, from kayaking down the pristine Delaware River to hiking the beautiful Appalachian Mountain trails. But as a child, I spent most of my time in the Pocono Mountains on a beautiful property in a forest that my Oma had found and then left to my mother and I when she passed away. While she could no longer be with us there in person, I felt her spirit and her love and remembered our time together whenever we went to our special forest. But with every year and every drive up, I would see more fracking wells out the car window. I saw more trees cut down and land stripped bare. The monstrous trucks full of chemicals and wastewater got louder and louder and broke through the forest cover and the trees and reached us deep within the property. My memories with my Oma and the love she had for her forest were tainted and forever stolen from me. We have since had to sell her property because it was no longer the paradise she had hoped to share with me. It was no longer the sanctuary that she had left to enjoy the nature she knew I always cherished. We have a new special place in an area where fracking is prohibited. Pipelines and other threats are still a problem, but at least we're protected from the frackers. I realized then at a young age I'd have to fight for my rights to clean air, pristine waters, and the right to enjoy my beautiful home of Pennsylvania. I may only be 22, but I am old enough to understand that Article 1, Section 27, the Green Amendment, is a landmark in our Constitution. I am old enough to know that this constitutional amendment demands of our politicians to protect our beautiful state of Pennsylvania. I demand that our politicians uphold this landmark to protect my earth. My generation will not take a gamble on the fate of our planet or the fate of future generations like you see behind me. We expect those that we voted into office to uphold the Green Amendment. And at 22 years old, I can tell you another fact for certain. Just as easily as we voted you in, we can vote you out. My friends who I played in the local streams with are now becoming my colleagues and fellow advocates in protecting our planet. We expect the politicians we voted into office to uphold our right to a healthy environment. My generation is now one of voting adults, and we will exercise that power to protect our planet for mine and future generations. We are tired of hearing about bridge fuels to get us to a green future. We have the technology, we have the resources, and now we have the law all on our side to secure a clean and green present, as well as a clean and green future for the generations to come. It is mine and future generations that are calling on all politicians to uphold our constitutional right and to fulfill their constitutional obligation to honor and protect our rights to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And as a childhood character once told us, as all these children represent behind us, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. Thank you.